Good afternoon. This is episode 7 in the first book that I wrote. Lightning at 200 Durham Street. The last time I talked to you, I started by talking a little bit about that very scary word, electromagnetic spectrum. And I promised I'd say a little bit more about it today. And I will, but I'm not saying a lot about it yet. But it is important. I know it's a very scary sounding word. So if you don't like electromagnetic spectrum, then just we'll call it EMI. EMI's a nice sounding name. And light, of course, is a large part of that electromagnetic spectrum. Mentioned that last time, and I think I showed you the light part of the spectrum. Well, this time I'm going to show you that the spectrum is much larger than you think. So if you look at the picture I've just put up on the screen, you'll see that light is a small portion of it, and at the top of the upper part of that, you'll see there are all kinds of other radiations and waves along there. Everything from radio waves towards the bottom to X-rays and gamma rays and other types of radiation. They're all the same kind of thing. And if you look carefully at the very bottom of the one part of the chart, you'll see that someone, well, it was me, I confess, I wrote in brain waves, because brain waves are part of the electromagnetic spectrum. While we're sitting here talking, if I start to think, or if someone knocked at the door and I reacted to the knock on the door, then I would send out brain waves. Yes, brain waves are real. If you don't believe me, then that's too bad, because someone invented a device in the early 1920s, a good 20 or so years before I was born, that measured brain waves, and that's an electrocephalograph. You may even have your brain waves measured. So there really are brain waves, and they're part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And that's why I'm talking about them, because, as I said, I believe that's why Joel can pick up on these thoughts that are sent out by essences. That's all I'm saying about it for now. But you see that as the story, Lightning at 200 Durham Street, goes on, and as my books go on, he does communicate with some of the people who have died. But I'll leave that for now. And instead, I'll go back to the story. Now, when we were last talking about this story, we had, I think it was Assistant Chief Rutherford. He was in Ottawa, and he had talked to Mrs. Ruth Carter, and she'd indicated that her daughter hadn't returned from her visit to Chaseford. And of course, then they both realized, I think, who the body likely belonged to. And so when Rutherford reported this information back to Chief Petrovic and indicated to him that Mrs. Carter wasn't able to travel to identify the body, if it was indeed the body of her daughter, and that her brothers, Louise's brothers, were too busy and couldn't travel, they came up with the name of a friend, Alice Chalmers. Ruth said she visited, that's why she went to Chaseford in the first place, to visit with her good friend, Alice Chalmers. So this is where Alice Chalmers enters the story. And I'm going to read from my book here. Alice Chalmers was a long-time resident of Chaseford. She was a stocky, friendly woman with a ready smile. Her oldest children were gone from home and now had families of their own. The youngest son, Chad, was during the summer working at the newspaper with her, because that's where she worked. And he was attending University of Western Ontario during the rest of the year. Alice worked 4 afternoons a week, and her meeting then was set at 11 o'clock in the morning at the police station, where she went in to see Chief Petrovic. He had summoned her to come in. He wanted to talk to her about something. So in she went. He offered her a chair, and she sat down. She said, "I'm worried. I'm curious. Why you want to see me?" The chief looked at her and sighed and said, "You're not in any trouble, Alice. You haven't done anything wrong. No one in your family has done anything wrong. That's not the problem." And he was kind of stumbling around because he knew what a good friend she'd been to Louise Carter. He said, "You probably know, because I think everybody in town knows, that there was a body found in a cabin in the bush. And unfortunately, we think that body may belong to your good friend, Louise Carter." Well, of course, you know what happened. Alice broke down. She went into a state of shock. She started to sob. "It can't be. It can't be," she sobbed. "I had supper with her Saturday. Just the two of us." Maybe you had that experience, where you talk to somebody and they seem fine, and 2 days later they're dead. That's a terrible experience that Alice is faced with. Now, this is on Monday, first day of the week. So, I don't know. It makes no sense to me. Whenever Louise came to Chaseford, aka Stratford, we had a good visit. We always agreed to meet on the Saturday of the Victoria Day holiday. We'd go out for supper. I left my husband at home, and he'd look after the kids. He didn't seem to mind. So this had gone on for a long time. "I'm very sorry, Alice," the chief said. "I know it's a great shock, but we need your help." So she said, "What can I do?" And he said, "We've talked to Louise's mom, or at least someone I contacted in the Ottawa Police Service talked to her. We need someone to identify the body, and she suggested you could do it." Alice was momentarily distraught, but said, "Yes, I'll do that for you." So he said, "You're to meet Dr. Whittles at the hospital at 1:30. Can you do that? I know you work in the afternoons." "It won't be a problem, Chief. They're very good to me at the newspaper. I'll be there." So Alice made a tearful exit. The chief had lots to do that day. He had lots of people to interview, and he was arranging interviews. He was going to be interviewing some, and Detective O'Neill, who'd come from London, was going to be doing some of the interviews, and so were the constables. They had lots of people interviewed. Joel and Jay and the parents of both kids and the farmers in the surrounding area. They had lots of work to do. Anyway, later that night, Dr. Whittles phoned the chief at his home. And he said, "Alice Chalmers is a very nice person. She was very upset, Chief, but she did give us a positive identification. It is indeed the body of Louise Carter." He said, "After she left, I started doing some work. I've examined the body and the internal organs, but I have limited resources. Remember, this is a small town, and it's 1928. I have limited resources. I can rule out the head injury. That was insignificant when it comes to causing her death. And I'm almost entirely certain she didn't die from natural causes. But I need to get some help." So Petrovic said, "Listen, Whittles, I'll contact the Toronto police and see if they can suggest someone who might have more information than we do. So Whittles says, thanks, bye. I hope you're successful. And he hung up. That was Monday night. Tuesday morning, the chief had already put a call through to Toronto, and he had the name of a doctor of forensic medicine that he passed on to Frank Whittles. Frank was delighted. The doctor's name was Dr. Omar Whitehead. Whittles immediately went to the telephone when he found out that, with the phone number, and he called. Whitehead talked to him for a few minutes. He asked for the details of the case. And then he said, I'd be pleased to come. I'm not that busy this morning. I can be down to Chaseford by 3 o'clock this afternoon. I will tell you, though, that you've told me now that you do have limited resources. I may find it necessary to take some of the victim's blood, and perhaps part of the body, back to our lab in Toronto for further analysis. Well, that was okay with Dr. Whittles. So he showed up at 3 o'clock and they worked away on that. And while they were working on that, trying to find out what had caused the woman's death, the chief and Inspector O'Neill and the constables were doing interviews. That took care of Wednesday. Pretty much. So on Thursday, the coroner, Dr. Whittles, and the specialist, Dr. Whitehead, who had been working since Tuesday afternoon, after they had examined the organs that they'd removed from the body and done extensive testing on the blood, they still didn't have an answer. So they knew it wasn't natural causes. And Dr. Whitehead said, based on certain things he noticed about the blood and the brain tissue, he thought poisoning was involved. They tested locally for the common poisons and found nothing. So Whitehead said, with your permission, I need to take the blood and part of the brain back with me to Toronto. We have a bigger lab, more resources, and can test for a lot more poisons. So that's what was happening next. And that's the end of the session for today.